Right, I think we may as well get going. Good to see loads of people here. Thank you all for coming, and particular thanks to those who've volunteered or been volunteered to speak. Mostly volunteered, I have to say. Usual thing, just keep your microphones off unless you're talking. We are being, I think we're recording, aren't we, Gary, at the moment?
Well, I hope it is. I don't know, Jerry. Fingers crossed, technology permitting, yes, we are. So.
And that will be up on the website in due course, as all of them. And again, if we feel we need not to have them on, not to record it, do make yourself, do make your feelings known in a chat or something. That said, I don't think there's anything else for me to say. So let's go. We're going to start with our new venture, which is a little roundup of FileMaker news, and Gary's going to launch into that. I think you all know the agenda. If you just before we do that, we're going to have a little news roundup first. Then Wim is going to talk about server performances, and Egbert is going to talk about a lovely new resource that he's getting together. And then John's going to talk about OData and FileMaker Server. Over to you, Gary.
So hopefully you should see my screen. Fingers crossed you all do. Thumbs up if you do. Right, fine. One of the things I want to do, everyone that's here, everyone that's new here, if you do mention anything about the event, please use the hashtag FMBug, please, going forward. That would be great if you could. And just a roundup of some Claris news. So a couple of things I've been trawling around over the last few weeks, really, and I've spoken to Penny about that, who's my lead developer that does most of the stuff for me, to be honest, in Claris FileMaker. And I just wanted to highlight some areas that I found that I thought for discussion. And I don't want to have the discussion now. The point is, this event goes on. After the event finishes, there's usually several hours where all our FileMaker discussions go on late into the night, and it's compulsory you go get a glass of wine, a bottle of wine, a keg of wine, whatever you want, and sit there drinking it and eating and discussing FileMaker stuff to the early hours of the morning for some of us. Some of you that are on the other side of the pond, it's in the afternoon. So if you have time to join us and you can spare the time from work, please do. So a couple of things I noticed that I thought was a thing of topic was no M1 support and Big Sur support for FileMaker is a bit of an issue. And this is something that I've done some research on what they're doing with it. They are due to release the Big Sur support, which is fine, which it works fine providing you're only running FileMaker 19, but we'll have more of a discussion on that. But I think certainly there should be an option of why there isn't M1 support, bearing in mind they're an Apple subsidiary, which I'm surprised that other suppliers and other vendors and other software companies have managed to achieve this, but FileMaker has not. And then the couple of other things I wanted to go over was the key areas of, I hope you've all seen the Claris platform vision. I know quite a few of you would have. It's a good insight. It was released on the 3rd of Feb on YouTube, if you didn't see it live. And there's a lot of information in there about what the roadmap is and the process of what certainly FileMaker or Claris is doing going forward. They're doing more faster releases of software. They're also doing a quarterly vision. So every quarter, every 3 months is going to be this video of key things that they're releasing, key things that they're going to focus on, the areas of issues that they've addressed. The one good thing I did like about that presentation, there was a Q&A session at the end of it, and it was a very lengthy Q&A session, which I thought was really good. A lot of questions came in. I have to say some of the answers weren't very clear, but there were questions being asked and answers were being given. But one of the key areas I want to discuss is what we all think of the One Claris platform and where that's going, what the future of Claris is delivering for us, certainly for us as developers and the community. So it's certainly an area that I want to discuss further on. That's one talking point I want to cover. Second talking point is, I thought this slide was brilliant, apart from the second line, which scares the life out of me. If every employer is a developer, I'm going to run, because I wouldn't trust development with any of my staff that I employ, I can assure you. So, but they do explain the reasons behind that wording, which I'm happy to go over, and we'll cover that in more detail. Is there going to be a Claris Engaged? Yes, there is. There is one for this year. Is it virtual? Absolutely. So if you didn't know when that was, I would urge you all to put those dates in your calendar. I have to say, the virtual one last year was very good. I joined most of it, if not all of it. Even if the sessions were at 1, 2 in the morning, I was still up. I stayed up to do them. And it's really good. A lot of people were online. The Slack channels that were put out were brilliant as well for discussion points. They went on to all hours. So I thought it was a very well put together event. More the fact the community got behind it, I think, which was really good. And some of the questions that came up out of that with the answers in it is, like one of the things I said is, from the UK perspective, is there going to be a cloud UK server presence? Bearing in mind we've just gone through Brexit, and the answer was, yes, we have Ireland. And someone did put in there, well, Ireland's no longer in the UK, so that's a bit of an issue. And they said, oh, yes, we've realised that now. We will actually address the UK market, and we're looking at for the future. So that's fine. So if you work for a company that can't have your assets outside your geographic area, and you can't put it in Europe, and you can't put it in the US or any other country, they are going to consider the UK, but it's in the future. And the point is Ireland is your only point of call at the moment. On the M1 chip, Rick did answer that he was looking at winter 2020 or early spring 21. I wasn't 100% sure which year he was talking about, whether it was winter this year and spring next year or whatever. So I've put the date of 2020, 21 because as Apple subsidiary, I would hope they are. And one of the things that was said is they are looking at in around about it should be late winter because I only threw this together. Late winter, they're looking to replace an Internet Explorer for Windows as the web direct browser and moving over to Edge, which I think could be a definite bonus if they can get that code in. That'll make a huge difference. So that's my little bit of roundup of the news that I've found. Going forward, this is a feature that I really want to make more of, and I want the feedback from you guys of anything that you want to discuss in the news or anything that wants to plant the seed for discussion later on in the evening, really. So with that, then that was my little 5-minute whistle-stop tour around the news from I've seen from FileMaker over the last couple of months. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. Sorry, just sending a message. Well, I don't think there's any. I mean, that's interesting. If anyone wants to talk about, there's some stuff in there that I didn't know about. It's hard to keep up all the time. So yeah, give us some feedback as to whether you find you find this is going to be a useful feature, because the plan is to have a little roundup every meeting, and I don't know, maybe we'll inveigle some guest presenters to give their own particular slant on it at each event. But I haven't mentioned that to Gary. I've just thrown that one in the mix.
Cheers. So guess for me to do. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, so if you want to talk about any more of that, just hang around for the virtual bar afterwards and throw it in there. Wim, are you ready to present?
I am.
Take it away. It's all the floor is all yours.
All right. All right. So I guess most of you know me. I'm Wim Decorte. I work at Soliant. I run the FileMaker side of Soliant. We have about 30 FileMaker developers full-time on staff. I've been around the community for quite a bit. I started with FileMaker 3 in I guess the mid-90s. Given the number of times I have moved, I can neither confirm nor deny that I'm on the run for something. I will rush through the slides. So I don't want this presentation to be all slides, but I do want to paint the backdrop a little bit about why. I won't go too deep into the monitoring aspect of it, but clearly, if we're talking about performance and we want to measure the performance of our solution as it runs on a particular server, there's going to be some monitoring involved, right? You have to have some metrics. You have to have some numbers that tell you exactly how it's behaving. And this is actually one of my pet peeves, right? And it's a question I've asked at many DEF CONs that I presented at. And the question goes something like that. We are good developers, but are we good deployers? And the reason for asking is that if you look at, if the screen line represents the life cycle of our solution, anything that we build for our customers, as developers, we tend to focus a lot on that initial phase, right? 99% of our effort goes into the development of it because that's what we're good at. That's we gather the requirements and we build something that does what the client wants to do. But the client will get most of its value through that whole life cycle, and things will happen, right? New operating system will come out, new versions of FileMaker will come out, things will go belly up on the network. So there's a bunch of stuff that may interrupt or at least affect the value that your client will get from your solution. And I think because for me, at least, I want to make sure that my clients get the full value of the solution that I make. Very early on, I felt the need to make sure that I understand how it's been deployed and what affects that kind of performance and the end, that value that the customer will get from that. Any server deployment that you have out there, FileMaker or otherwise, has 4 traditional bottlenecks, right? Disk I/O, CPU, networking, and memory. And there's a 5th one that actually trumps pretty much anything that we can throw at it, and that is the design of your solution, right? If you can put your solution on the best possible server that money can buy, but if you made some design boo-boo somewhere, it's going to still suck, right? So design is definitely a factor. But we'll talk for now a little bit about those 4 traditional bottlenecks. And I'm using a screenshot from the old admin console, and I do that to drive home a point. That's where I strayed a little bit into monitoring. Used to be in the admin console, we can actually tell or see some of these metrics that FileMaker Server gives us. Now, FileMaker Server still gives us those metrics. They are just not visible in the admin console at this point. At some point, it may come back, but for now, they are not. And many FileMaker developers will always turn or have always turned to the admin console to see those numbers. So I'll use this as a bit of a guide, but know that they are there. You just need to open and open the log file and look at it in something else than the admin console, right? So when it comes to memory, we have 2 metrics. We have the cache hit percentage and the cache unsaved percentage. So that will tell you specifically for FileMaker Server how FileMaker Server deals with the amount of data that you're pushing in and out of your solution. If your cache hit percentage is low, you may have to increase the cache. The thing about the FileMaker Server cache is that the number you assign to the cache, FileMaker Server will grab. FileMaker Server will monopolize. It will not share that with anything else. So if you have a server that only has 4 gigs of RAM or 8 gigs of RAM, and you set this cache to, say, 6 gigs of RAM, you may be starving the machine from using that memory for crucial tasks, like running the operating system and doing some of the other things that FileMaker Server does. Because FileMaker Server isn't one thing, right? It's a collection of processes. There's something like 6 or 8, depending on what features that you toggle on. So if you assign 6 gigs of RAM to the FileMaker Server database cache, and you don't need it, because it's just a database cache, right? It's not a magical dial that will make everything about FileMaker Server go quicker. It's strictly about the amount of data that FileMaker Server can keep in memory and then dish out to the clients or receive from the client. So if you set that too high, you will definitely affect the rest of the performance of your FileMaker Server and the machine in general. So that's an important number to look at. When it comes to disk I/O, we have a couple of different metrics. 1 or 2 of them have to do with the raw volume, like how much disk activity are you actually generating in volume? How many kilobytes are you reading and writing to the hard drive? And then the last one there is the input-output time per call. That's how much time FileMaker Server has to spend on those calls, like doing the actual read and doing the actual write. So it's not a volume-based thing, it's a time-based thing. It'll tell you how much time FileMaker Server expends to that. For network performance, we only have volume-based metrics, mainly because it's kind of difficult for FileMaker Server to do an end-to-end kind of monitoring of what happens on the network, because it can only go as far as what it puts out on the network card. But we can tell how many network kilobytes we generate that are being pushed into FileMaker Server, and that FileMaker Server has to push out. And then we have 4 that have to do with processing power. We have the number of remote calls per second. Remote calls are the instructions that FileMaker Server receives from the clients, right? And we have 2 metrics about that. One is the raw number of how many come in per second. The other one is how many is FileMaker Server dealing with right now. That's the remote calls in progress. And that's actually a very good indicator of problems. If that number, and the number varies by, again, that's based on your design and the specs of your server, but there's definitely in every single deployment, there's a number, a magical number there in remote calls in progress that if you exceed it, you will feel it, or your clients will feel it. I very often use the number 10. If you have more than 10 remote calls in progress, it's very often a sign that the whole thing will start to slow down. And then we have the elapsed time per call and the wait time per call. The elapsed time per call is actually the aggregate of the wait time, the I/O time, and the actual processing time. But the elapsed time per call is a really good indicator. If that number is high, then FileMaker Server is spending a lot of CPU time basically executing whatever it is that your clients are asking it to do, right? And the wait time has to do with these calls that come in from the clients having to wait, having to stand in line in essence, right? So they go on a queue because they have to wait for their turn. So that's a good indicator that you may need more cores and not so much faster cores when you see very high wait times per call. And of course, as I said, these factors are affected by the actual hardware that you put FileMaker Server on, but certainly also by the design of your solution, right? So we'll look at all of these together a little bit. FileMaker Server, when you look at it, wherever FileMaker Server is installed, and this is a screenshot from macOS, the folder structure on Windows is exactly the same. There's a logs folder, and in that logs folder, you will find all the relevant logs that have to do with the stuff that you want to know. The single most important one of that one that's in there is the stats.log. And unfortunately, the stats.log is not one of those logs that gets turned on by default when you install FileMaker Server. I wish it was. I've been pushing them really hard, them is Claris. I've been pushing them really hard for ages to have that one turned on by default, because without the stats.log, and the stats.log, that's the same, that screenshot from the admin console that shows you that those metrics, that's what gets collected every 30 seconds by default and written to a log file. If you don't have that one, you really are flying blind. There's no way that you know how your solution on that particular server is behaving. So if you walk away from this presentation with just one thing to remember is when you install FileMaker Server, turn it on. Turn it on immediately. Now, in those old admin consoles, you could actually turn it on in the admin console. In FileMaker 19.1, I believe you can turn it on in the admin console again. But in 18 and 19.0, you have to make a trip to the command line to turn them on, or make an API call, same difference. But you have to turn it on, right? It's called the use stats log. And as you can see in mine, it's set to true. 2 more things to keep in mind about that stats log. One, the default logging interval is 30 seconds, meaning FileMaker Server will poll those metrics every half a minute. And you can adjust that, right? You can set it longer, you can set it shorter. Obviously, the shorter you set it, the more you may be affecting the behavior of your FileMaker Server, right? That's a big open door, but anytime you monitor something, you will be affecting the thing that you monitor. So you have to keep that in mind. But my take on that is if your server cannot handle the extra load of the monitoring, you probably have problems elsewhere, right? It's probably already a marginal server to begin with. So login interval 30 seconds by default. The default log size is 40 megs. So you'll get a certain amount of events that get measured or captured in that log. And FileMaker Server keeps one old log, right? So when that initial log of 40 megs fills up, FileMaker will save it as a stats.old, stats/old, and we'll start a new log. But if that one then gets full, it'll delete the old stats log. So if you want to capture some long-term metrics about your FileMaker server, chances are you'll have to use something else beside the stats log that the FileMaker server has. In the old console, we could look at those numbers a little bit. We're not able to do that right now. I was never a big fan of seeing that in the admin console, mainly because these stats, the stats log, it's basically the same metrics as in the stats log that we're looking at here. They're a little myopic in the sense that they will tell you what FileMaker Server is or what's happening with FileMaker Server, but they don't necessarily paint the bigger picture of what's going on your machine. All right, so it's better than nothing, obviously, but it's not the total picture. And again, mainly because as FileMaker developers, we're not always well-versed in monitoring and troubleshooting a server. So we use the tools that are right in front of us, and that's one of them. So we look at that and we try to make conclusions or draw conclusions based on what we see here. And really, we should be looking a little beyond that. If you deploy on Windows, you get the benefit of Windows perfmon, which is the de facto and a very, very good, actually, tool that is built on Windows servers. And everything that FileMaker Server captures in that stats.log gets actually written or captured by perfmon, right? So all of those counters, the exact same ones, are available to you in perfmon. And now you have the benefit of being able to capture pretty much anything you want about your FileMaker Server, other processes, different, more granular metrics around all the processes that make up FileMaker Server. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can do there. On macOS, not so much. Right, so you have your activity monitor. That's about as good as it gets, except for some of the command line tools like the top and some of the other ones. But when it comes to visual tools, that's pretty much it. If you filter your activity monitor to anything that starts with FM, you'll get a list of FileMaker processes, and then you can switch between the tabs to look at, and those tabs basically break down across the lines of those traditional bottlenecks, right? So you have CPU, memory, disk, and network. So it'll give you something, but it's not very good, not on Mac OS. Ever since when was it, FileMaker 17, that the admin console changed a bit, we've been making a big push, and I've spoken about this at DEF CON, is use a really good monitoring tool. Zabbix is one of those. It's not the only one. It's one that is used by a lot of IT departments. It's open source, meaning it's free. Right, so there's really no excuse not to use it. It requires a Linux server, which is probably somewhat of an impediment to many of us embracing it, because now you have to set up a Linux server. But still, it's a really, really good tool. IT departments love it. If you're talking about monitoring with one of your clients, and you should be talking to your clients about monitoring, right? Because you need to know how your solution behaves, and there's really no way around that. If you are working with an IT department, you can ask them about what kind of monitoring that they have, and maybe they have Zabbix, maybe they have something else like New Relic or Datadog or any of the other ones. All of those tools you can configure to also capture that information that FileMaker Server makes available, and then store it long term or use it as the basis for some analysis and all of that good stuff. There's a ton of good resources on FileMaker Server and Zabbix, so I won't go into it in a lot of detail, but it's there. And if you want to know more, Google it on the Soliant blog. We have lots of it. You can find my old DEF CON presentation, and if not, find me on the community and ask some questions. Of those 4 traditional bottlenecks that we talked about, all 4 of them can kill you. But the 2 that are the most typical are going to have a big effect on the performance of your solution on your client server is going to be the processing power and the disk I/O. Memory and network typically aren't an issue unless you try to deploy on a machine with 2 gigs of RAM or something like that, or you still have a 10 base T kind of network connection. But these days, network and memory aren't really a big issue. It's going to be processing power and disk I/O. When we talk about processing power, we're really talking about 2 different things, cores and speed. The screenshot that we're looking at here is basically it's a task manager on Windows, and you can see, or you can ask it to see the number of cores and the speed of the cores that is available to you, right? So the yellow highlight there, that's the clock speed of any one of those cores. So in this case, 2.4 gigahertz, which is decent. It's not super fast, but it's decent. And then the second one to look at is the number of cores, the sheer number of cores that is available to you. And the difference here really is like between a fast car and a bus, right? And the decision on whether to go for fewer cores but really fast cores or more cores, it's a really important decision to make. And there's a trade-off that you need to make, because typically the more cores you're going for, the slower the clock speed gets. And that's just a question of heat dissipation, right? If you have 48 cores at 4 gigahertz, the thing will melt. So those don't exist. Well, they do exist. They're really, really expensive. So typically, the more cores you get in the machine, the slower the clock speed gets. So you do have to make that trade-off. Slower clock speed means that every single thing you ask of FileMaker Server will be just a tad slower than if you had a machine with higher clock speeds, right? And that's very often where Mac Minis come into play. Mac Minis typically have a very good clock speed, right? So we're talking about 3.5 gigahertz, as opposed to your typical server hardware on the Windows side, which typically comes in at 2.4, 2.6 gigahertz. So if you do single user tests, the Mac Mini will beat the Windows server, right? And you go like, see, Mac is better. I'm not going to go there. But that's the Ferrari and the bus, right? If you have to move 50 people at the same time, the bus is going to be better than your Ferrari, right? But you have to calculate a little bit. Could I make 50 round trips with my Ferrari in the same time that it takes the bus to get there, right? If the answer is yes, maybe you can go for the Ferrari and not go for the bus. But that's the kind of decision that you're looking at there. And of course, the choice is highly dependent on load. And with load is the maximum number of concurrent users that you'll be throwing at that. And we're talking about FileMaker Pro, FileMaker Go users, but also all the other things that you'll throw at the server, right? Perform script on server schedules, whether you will be using WebDirects or any of the APIs, all of that stuff happens server side. When you think about WebDirects, or even using the data API for some of the things that you want to do from inside FileMaker, or as a sort of design paradigm, you want to use Perform Script on Server a lot because it's faster. The thing there is to test and to extrapolate from your testing. And that's where the numbers come into play, right? You need to be able to capture those numbers so that you can do that extrapolation. When you ask your FileMaker Server to do things, your FileMaker Server becomes not only a database server, it becomes an application server. Two different roles, right? Because your FileMaker Server will always be a database server. It is responsible for taking whatever data you change or create or delete and making sure that it's get written to the FileMaker files, and that's done in a secure and fast way. But if you ask it to actually perform business logic, now it's an application server, two different roles. And you have to make sure that the resources are available for both of those roles. And it's an easy trap for us developers to fall into when we want to do a report, and we do it client. And as we know, the FileMaker Go and FileMaker Pro clients are fat clients, meaning that they do a lot of the processing client side. So when we do something and it's kind of expensive or slow on the client side, we may be tempted to say, oh, I'll just throw it at the server, right? I'm cutting out a lot of the network traffic and all of that good stuff. So as a developer, it looks much faster. But now we go to deploy and you have 50 concurrent users, and maybe the server isn't ready for that kind of load or extra load, right? So now it's slower. So again, test, extrapolate from the numbers, and figure it out from there. Virtual servers. We live in a world of virtual servers, obviously, so FileMaker Server is fully supported on all of that, so I'm not saying that, but there is a real possibility that when you ask for a server or you talk to an IT department, that they will give you as minimal of a server as they can get away with. And the reason for that is that they have one physical host, an actual server machine, and they will want to cram as many virtual servers on that physical box as they can, right? So If they can get away with not giving you a lot of resources, that means that there are more resources available to maybe jam in one more virtual server at some point. So it is something to be aware of. It's something to not take for granted when you're giving a server that you go look at it. And actually later today, I have to have a meeting with a new client in Alaska. It's a school district, and this is their server. I was just on the server this morning trying to figure this one out. Now, if you compare that to the first screenshot that I had on my slide, that was a server with 48 cores, and that's an actual machine from one of our clients as well. Clock speed was 2.4 gigahertz. What we're looking at now is a server with 4 cores and a 2.0 clock speed, right? So that's worse in every single respect than the other server that we just looked at. It has fewer cores, and the cores that we do have are slower. And this is actually a server where they expect to be throwing 50 WebDirect concurrent users at it. So that's not going to fly, right? And when I say that's not going to fly, I'm obviously making a judgment call because I need to look at their solution and figure out where the pain points are going to be. If you have 50 WebDirect users and all that they do is look at one screen and there's not a lot of data that needs to be fetched to look at that screen, that is going to fly. So obviously needing to know what the nature of the solution is, what the design of the solution is, what kind of interaction we can expect from the users. It's one of those things. The question comes up on the community all the time, right? Is a Mac Mini a good server? Full stop, or question mark. And my answer always is I cannot tell you, right? That's an impossible question. And then they go, oh, is it a good server for 20 users? Like I still can't tell you, right? Because the number of users is a poor proxy for what the server is expected to do. It's a bit of an indicator, but it's not a really good one because you can have 20 users just looking at screens and you can have 20 users doing very complicated sub-summary reporting. Totally different ballgame, right? So you can't really tell unless you go and dig a little deeper into what the solution does and doesn't do. So looking at the server, and this is a virtual server, obviously just by looking at it. There's also some other things there. Over on the right-hand side below the right lowermost little graph there, it says base speed 2 gigahertz, sockets 4, virtual processors 4. The sockets is a little out there as well. That's something that I need to look at because that's not very standard. All right, along the lines of processing power, and this has come up many, many times over the last 15, 20 years, is FileMaker Server multi-threaded? Because people think, well, it must not be multi-threaded because it's performed so badly. Or IT departments, they look at the graphs of those 48 cores that you have in it, and they draw the conclusion like FileMaker Server never uses more than 10% of all the CPU power that's available. So clearly it's not multi-threaded because otherwise it would use all the cores all the time to 100% max. It really isn't that simple. And this is an old quote. I mean, this quote is at least 10 years old from the Claris engineers. FileMaker Server has always been multi-threaded. Doesn't mean that it can always use all the cores at 100%, right? Because there's so many constraints and variables involved that will determine whether FileMaker Server can take advantage of all the processing power that's in your server. Suffice it to say that if you throw a lot of activity at your server, and I mean a lot of activity from different users, not a lot of activity from a single user, but a lot of activity from different users, you're going to benefit from having more cores. That will spread the load. And you may obviously also benefit from that higher clock speed because that means that every single operation gets done a little faster. But FileMaker Server really is completely multi-threaded. We'll talk a little more about that when we actually look at some numbers of the different versions of FileMaker Server over time. We're not going to spend too much time on that. There's a lot of things that can affect it. The single most important thing to remember is that FileMaker Server and FileMaker Client talk to each other all the time. And as such, FileMaker Server on any network is always going to be the canary in the coal mine, right? Always. If there is something wrong on the network, FileMaker Server is going to, or FileMaker in general, is going to be the first one to suffer. If it does suffer, it does mean that FileMaker is bad. It means that there probably is something a little funky on the network that needs to be looked at. So it's an early indicator, and people go like, well, I can go to a website and it works, or I can open my Word document from a file share. It's not the same thing, right? FileMaker Server, FileMaker Client talk to each other all the time. Even if there's nothing happening at the client side, they still communicate a lot. So anything that happens on the network, and the usual suspects are things that will push the FileMaker traffic down on the network, like voice over IP, right, or video over IP. Anything that has somewhat aggressive quality of service settings will affect FileMaker Server, right? People watching Netflix while they're working is going to be a big one there. The signs to look for if you have network performance issues is those disconnects, right? If you see bunches of disconnects in the FileMaker Server event log, you'll, well, obviously your clients will tell you because they'll be disconnected, but still, they may not always know, or they may not always see the effect of being disconnected, because ever since FileMaker 14, we had this feature called network resilience, where FileMaker clients will try to reconnect automatically if it gets dropped, but still, something to watch out for. Memory, just like network, isn't really an issue unless it's really, really bad. Over time, and obviously this is where application server versus database server comes into play, right? So database server, database cache, the cache heading that we have on FileMaker Server, don't set it higher than it needs to go, because it will monopolize a good chunk of the physical RAM. If your server does non-database tasks, like WebDirect, perform script on server, all of these things, you're really spawning mini client sessions on the server, so those will require some memory. And WebDirect is the big one, right? Because that's a really full-fledged session that you're running on your FileMaker Server. And the memory requirements for WebDirect sessions have gone down over time. I remember back in FileMaker 13, it was something like 400 to 600 megabytes per session. I think it's below 256 megabytes per session at this point, but that's sort of like the number that I keep in mind to make sure that you can allocate not just to FileMaker Server, right, but just to that WebDirect application server task. In addition to that, you'll need whatever the operating system needs, plus whatever the other FileMaker Server processes will need as well, plus your database cache. Disk.io, obviously, this day and age, it's typically most a solid state, so we don't usually have to worry too much about spinning platters anymore. But obviously, if you still have them, go for the fast ones, right? Because the faster the disk.io is, the better. When you deal with solid states, there is a difference between server class hardware and workstation class hardware, and it's going to come out either in reads or in writes, but it is going to come out. And also in the mean time between failure, right? So how quickly do these things degrade over time is a factor very often of the server class versus workstation class. One thing I wanted to call out is RAID, a redundant array of inexpensive disks. And there has always been some confusion about that. RAID is not about making your disk.io faster, right? It's about building in redundancy. And very often when you deal with IT departments, they will go for a RAID 5. And the reason that they go for a RAID 5 is that for them, it gives them the biggest bang for the buck, right? It allows them to have as big of a RAID, or at least as big of a redundancy factor with the minimal sets of hard drives that they can get away with, right? So RAID 5 is what IT departments really love. It is not the best RAID for a database server, right? So for a database server, you want to go with something like RAID 1+0, which requires more hard drives, but it'll give you faster performance. So just something to keep in mind as you're talking with your clients, IT departments on some of these things. All right, and then we have all of these factors that have to do with the design, right? So up to now, we talked about the things that you can find in the server and the hardware, but now it's time to talk about some of the design choices or factors that can affect performance overall. And there's a slew of them, right? What it really comes down to is that as a developer, you'll need a good tool to look at these things. I use base elements a lot. There's FM Perception, there's Inspector Pro. They're all equally good. So I would say use all of them, really. From a practical point of view, I would say pick one and really learn how to use it, right? Learn all the ins and outs of the tool, because it'll benefit you a lot when you're able to basically get a solution like the one from Alaska that I'll have to work with later today. I can run a DDR, I can ingest that in my tool of choice, and then look at that. I can import the top call stats log as well from their server. And again, this is where you'd hope that they have it turned on. If not, I'll try to make sure that it's turned on before, a couple of weeks before I have to do the analysis, if I can get away with it. But I can ingest the top call stats log and the XML DDR and marry those together, and it'll tell me from the top call stats log, I can drill down to which schema elements of the solution are generating the most pain. I've listed a few of the usual suspects, things that will turn out to be expensive as you build your solution. There's other ones, of course, that are equally important. So what it really comes down to is that when we're talking about performance, it's really, really difficult to see the forest through the trees, right? So there's so many factors involved that it's tough to figure out, what am I looking at? Like, where do I even begin to figure out whether I will benefit from more cores? Do I need to go for faster cores? Is my disk I/O the constraining factor? Because of those 4 bottlenecks, if you don't know which one is your bottleneck, and you're throwing money at the wrong one, you're not going to solve anything, right? You're just wasting money. If processing power isn't the thing that is holding you back, but the disk I/O is, then switching to a machine with more cores isn't going to do anything for you, right? So, and then of course you want to know, what does that actually look like when I take the same solution and I put it on a server that has twice as many cores or faster cores? Like, how does that move the needle for what kind of operations? Because if you take a typical FileMaker solution and you put it on a machine with more cores, but there's nothing in the solution and its design that is designed to use those cores, then again, you're not going to solve anything, right? So you get the picture. Trying to solve performance issues or even map them out is a big undertaking, because there's so many things that are involved that it becomes difficult to see that forest through the trees. And of course, FileMaker Server or Claris puts out a new version, right? Now we need to know, okay, all things being equal, is this new version of FileMaker Server, is it faster or slower than the old one, right? So it's clear that we need some good testing tools, and one of them that I use a lot and that we put on GitHub, so you can just go ahead and download that, is Punisher. I'll go into Punisher a little bit and show you some actual numbers. Nick, I believe Nick is in attendance today too. Nick has an excellent tool as well that can help you make sense of different configurations and what the effect is of choosing one versus the other one, all things being equal. And all things being equal is kind of important here, because in order to measure, say, the impact of FileMaker 19.1 versus FileMaker 18, we need to make sure that the other variables are not involved, right? We need to be able to abstract out the things that we can control so that we can focus on just the things that are different. I need to be able to take the exact same configuration and run it on a AWS T3 large, and then run the same thing on a C5 large and see what the difference is, right? Because obviously if I use one of my solutions that I built for a client, but you test with one of yours, we can't really compare the numbers, because the design, the nature of the solution is going to be different, that we can't really use that. All right. All right, so this is Punisher. Like I said, you can download it from GitHub. It's free, it's open source. You can just download it. The way that it works is that in Punisher, I have a suite of 16 scripts that I test, and the 16 scripts are meant to be a relevant cross-section of things that all of our solutions do. And obviously, they're geared to being slow, right? So they're not geared to being as fast as I can make them. They're actually geared to make them as slow as I can make them, so that I can measure the impact of a different server or a different version of FileMaker Server. And actually, I can show you that. I'm not going to run a new test because it kind of takes a little bit of time. But I can take one of my configurations that I have. It's actually, this one is running on a Amazon T3 large. So FileMaker knows that. So it only gives me my two options, either CentOS or Windows. So say that I pick this configuration, I can test my scripts. I can pick from the scripts that I have. Typically, I run all of them. Actually, let's start at the top. So the 16 scripts are broken down into things that are computationally heavy, like a very long while, right? The while just happens in memory and invokes the compute. It doesn't create records, or it doesn't delete records, or it doesn't go fetch records, because I wanted to focus on just the compute power of FileMaker Server. I have other scripts that will create 1,000 records, because now I'm invoking the database engine. I have another one that will sort records. There's another couple of there that will import and export. So I try to cover the spectrum of what we typically do in our FileMaker Server solutions, so that I can then measure whether different configurations of FileMaker Server or different versions of FileMaker Server move the needle on any one of these types of operations. Because, say, for instance, in FileMaker 19.1, which is the FileMaker Server version that has big performance impacts. The big feature that FileMaker released, or Claris released, and there was the shared lock. And the shared lock is used for reads. It's not used for writes, right? What it really means is that any operation that our solutions do that invoke reads, doing searches, queries of any kind and type, are going to be faster, or at least they're advertised to be faster. So using Claris, we can see if that's true. What is not going to be faster is anything that has to do with writes, right? If I create 1,000 records in 19.0 or 19.1, there shouldn't be too much of a difference, and the numbers will bear that out. So it's important that a testing tool tries to mimic as closely as possible all the types of operations that we do in our FileMaker solutions. And typically, I run it with this one. What Punisher will do here, it will do 1, 5, 10, and 20 concurrent sessions of running the same scripts at the same time. And obviously, I'm using Perform Script on Server for that, right? Because I need to abstract out the client-side performance or the network performance, right? So I need to limit it to only what the server can do. And for that, I use Perform Script on Server. And it's geared in such a way that when I ask it to do 10 of those at the same time, all 10 sessions will start with the same script, and they will all wait for the last one to be done with that script before they move on to the next one, so that there's no cross pollution between, oh, one session is running that script, which is maybe an export, and this one is running an import. And now the different motor skills, if you will, of FileMaker Server are being invoked at different times and sort of like muddied up. So they're geared so that they each wait for each other as they go about doing these things. All right. Obviously, I'm running a lot of these tests on AWS servers because they're easy to spin up and look at those numbers and deploy this whole thing. In case you haven't worked with AWS a lot, it's a great tool, right? Because they have such a thing called CloudFormation, which is really, you express a FileMaker server as nothing more than a piece of JSON, and you give it to AWS CloudFormation, and it'll spin up a server according to the specs that you have in the JSON. It's a great tool. So let's have a look at some. What we're looking at here, by the way, this is all inside FileMaker. So this is using a pivot table JavaScript library to look at my numbers here. And the script is not relevant. Let's move this one out. All right. Which ones should I look at first? Actually, I can do machine and cores. I will look at a, actually select none. I'll do this one and a T3 XL, 2XL large. And we'll do 19.1. Actually, I will leave these ones in. All right. It actually does fit on my screen there completely. What we're looking at here is actually we're debunking a myth. We're actually looking at a couple of different things. First of all, we're looking at the total time, right? So every white cell here is the number of seconds it takes for that particular server with 20 concurrent users to perform all 16 scripts across all 20 concurrent users. So that's the time here for 10 concurrent users, and that's the time for a single perform script on server, right? And it shows you both the numbers and a bit of a bar chart, so you can visually put it together a little more nicely. We're looking at a T3 2x large and a somewhat older MacBook Pro, the 2013 one. Both have 8 cores, and they're running the same things across different versions of FileMaker Server, 19.1, 19.2, CentOS and Windows, CentOS and Windows. Well, actually, there's no Windows here because I installed CentOS on that MacBook. I didn't install Windows on that MacBook. So if we look at just this column here where it says CentOS, performance is true. The reason that I have a true and a false there is that in certain versions of FileMaker Server, you can actually turn off the performance enhancing features. There's a debug file that you can do to turn that on and off. So that's something that you can tweak. So I can run my tests with that on and off. Sorry for the background noise there. There's a garbage collection truck coming by. What I'm showing here in this column, and this is one of the myths that we sometimes we see that in the community once in a while, when people say, now that we have a FileMaker Server for Linux, I will choose Linux because everything will be much faster, right? Because Linux is somehow magical as an operating system, much better than Windows or Mac OS. And what these numbers are showing us is that is a myth, right? And I think conceptually we sort of know that, but no operating system is magical, right? Every operating system works largely in the same way. There's small variations in how they go about it. But you cannot take all the hardware, put Linux on it, and expect your FileMaker Server to be fast, right? That's not how it works. So both of these machines run, when running CentOS, both have 8 cores, and they actually both have roughly the same clock speeds, right? So we're looking at 2 machines that are in cores and clock speed about the same. They're running the same version of FileMaker Server, and they're running the same solution, but one is much slower than the other one. The only difference here is the generation of the CPUs, right? So this one, obviously AWS has always current generation CPUs. The MacBook has 7-year-old processors, and you can see what kind of difference that makes, right? Just the generation of CPUs can make a huge difference in how you pick your FileMaker Server and what kind of expectations or assumptions that you can or should make around that, right? So picking some older piece of hardware because you have it laying around and because it can run Linux is not going to always give you decent performance, right? And the difference here is about 200 seconds in the at the most there. Even in single user speed, there's about a 50 odd second difference there. Question is that, I'm not saying that you should always go for a T3 2x large on AWS and that you should never do this, what we're like recycling an older piece of hardware, but because maybe that difference in speed isn't relevant for your clients, right? And in that case, by all means, right, use a piece of old hardware and put Linux on it. It'll do just fine. Right? It's not going to fall over and break or go up in flames. But if you're after pure performance, then try not to use older hardware, is what this one is saying here. Right? So if I take, which one am I going to take out? Is that true? No, that's fine. I can go back to this one in a sec. All right, so the other thing along the same lines, and that's also a median and median. And we'll do a T3 2x large for this one. I'll put the scripts back. we'll do this one and import scripts. My long while and my sort data. And I'll just do 19.2 for this one. All right, so what we're looking at now is same version of FileMaker Server, right? So there's no differences in the server version. We're looking at the exact same machine. We're looking at a, let's put this one in front here. We're looking at a T3 2x large. And it runs CentOS and runs Windows. So now the only difference, because it's the same machine, same solution, same version of FileMaker Server, right? So the only difference at this point is the operating system. And I've picked these 4 scripts out of that suite of 16. I've picked these 4 to really debunk the other big myth in performance, is that CentOS is always going to be faster. The first myth was about the repurposing older hardware because you can run Linux on it. This one is Linux is going to be faster than Windows or Mac OS. Obviously, you couldn't do Mac OS on a T3 machine on AWS, otherwise I would have. But you can see that there's really no significant difference in running the same solution on the same hardware using the same version of FileMaker Server between Linux and Windows. There just isn't. And if we were expecting that, that would have been a faulty assumption, right? There are small differences between the different types of operations, but nothing really significant. Nothing that I would say, Linux is always faster across all types of operations, so always go Linux or always go Windows for that matter. And I think that's an important point to drive home. And hopefully by now you sort of get the value of a tool like Punisher, where you can do that kind of cross-section, where I want to look at the same machine with different versions of FileMaker Server. I want to look at the same version of FileMaker Server across different machines, but my solution and the way that I do my testing is always the same. And that makes my testing relevant for these kinds of things. If I do a C5 to extra large, for instance, if I add this one to the mix, actually, I'll get rid of the Windows one. So the difference between a T3 and a C5 when we talk about AWS instance, and that's kind of important if you've never really worked with Amazon instances, and it's so easy to get into Amazon. The most common instances that you'll find that people will spin up are T3 instances, right? The thing to remember about T3 instances is that they are burstable. They are burstable in 2 aspects, in CPU power and in disk I/O. And what it means with burstable is that you get something called a CPU credit balance. And the larger the instance you take, the more credits you build up or accumulate over time. But when you spin up a machine, it starts with 0 credits. And we're talking about a T3. A C5 and M5, they don't have credits. You basically get the full CPU power as you go along. But not with a T3. A T3 is burstable, meaning that at some point, you may be running out of CPU credits. If you ask your machine to do something that is computationally very heavy, if it has to invoke the processors a lot, it will run out of CPU credits. And when that happens, the machine will start throttling itself down. So the machine will become slower in essence, which is a really relevant point to keep in mind when you're testing these kinds of things. Obviously, for my testing, I made sure that all my T3s had fully built up their credits so that I wouldn't run out of credits when I was doing my testing. Actually, if I move my machine to here, it makes it a little more relevant. So the difference between a T3, which is a burstable instance, and a C5 is a compute optimized AWS instance, right? So one, you'll get the full benefit of its processors all the time, but you also get faster CPUs, right? So both T3 2x large and C5 2x large have the same number of cores. So in this case, we're testing the same version of FileMaker Server. We're testing the same solution. We're testing on a machine with the same cores, but we're testing faster cores. And this is how you can gauge the impact a little bit. So there's a couple of things that have no measurable impact. Obviously, if I did that on all the scripts, you would see some operations where it doesn't really make a difference because some of the tasks don't really invoke the CPU all that much. But the ones that do, like the long while, or even an import to some respects, you will see the benefit of going for faster cores, right? All other things being equal, faster cores, and again, under load will give you the bigger bang for the buck. Faster cores will also be faster in single user operations, right? Because faster cores will make everything faster. Because it can get to the task or the thing that's being asked to do just a whole lot faster than it could otherwise. All right, how am I doing for time there, Gary?
All good, fine for time.
You're fine, yeah.
All right, so that is what I do with Punisher, and I invite you to play with it. One of the things we can do is we can import and export configs, right? So if you want to see some of my testing data, I can just export it out. You can load it into yours, and you can do the comparison that way. Actually, let me show one more, which is kind of interesting. See if I can do that quickly. I didn't do too much testing on the other ones there. Actually, I should have included this one here. I was testing with the M1 at this point. We don't have a FileMaker Server version right now that is optimized for M1. So whatever results you have are anecdotal, not very relevant. We are expecting the next version of FileMaker Server to be fully M1 compatible. But you have two Mac Minis here, right? So, and this is the script that parses through a JSON array with 1,000 elements. So there's a little bit of compute, and it creates a record for every element it finds. So it creates 1,000 records. That's what this particular script does. I have a 4-core Mac Mini and a 6-core Mac Mini. Both of them are 2018 models. So one is an i7, the other one is an i3. And here too, these are same year models, right? So when it comes to the thing that I mentioned early on, the generation of the CPUs, here the generation of the CPUs is the same. The number of cores are different, but the class of CPU is different, i3 versus i7. And you can see there's a fairly big discrepancy between the runs here. Now, the interesting thing is that the single user run isn't that much different. That's because both of those Mac Minis have approximately the same core speeds, right? So if you don't generate enough load on your server, in this case my Mac Mini, the difference in speed isn't going to be very great because they run the task at the same clock speed. The difference is going to be in when you put more load on that FileMaker server. So in this case, when you look at a 20 concurrent user load, the 6-core machine does it in about half the time of the same 2018 Mac Mini, which is an i3 with 4 cores, right? So those are the kinds of numbers that you can get from Punisher when you start playing with these numbers and see what's up. Trying to see if they find one that's not so different. A long while, that basically using the while function to do something really expensive. No surprise there, right? So the faster CPU with the most cores is going to beat the crap out of the machine that has slower CPUs with fewer cores, right? So about half the time there. So if you need to pick a good server and you feel that you don't have a good grasp of how the server hardware, the class of like the number of cores, the clock speed, and that kind of thing, if you don't feel confident how it moves the needle, then use something like Punisher to get familiar, play with it a little bit and see which one it does. And then you can look at your solution and say, well, is my solution compute heavy? Or is it disk IO heavy? And then figure out, okay, well, I see that for anything that's disk IO, the difference between a 4-core Mac Mini and a 6-core doesn't really matter that much. So you can make good decisions when it comes to putting your money where you'll get the most bang for the buck as you pick your server hardware. So hopefully you'll find that tool useful. And like I said, Nick has a similar tool that can help you with that. It's always good to combine the results, or at least run tests on both sets of tools and see if you can find correlation or if they come up with totally different numbers. And then you can reach out to Nick or myself and have us talk you through what that looks like. All right. The other big tool that I mentioned is, and I use base elements for that, is use the top call stats log. Right. So I have a solution here it's an existing client solution. Nothing too fancy in that 15 files. It's a somewhat older solution. We didn't build it. At Soline, we get a lot of solutions that people come to us and say, hey, my solution isn't what it used to be like. Can you fix it? Which is why we come up with tools like Punisher, because there's nothing more potentially daunting than having to take apart somebody else's solution on a particular server and try to figure out where do we go with this, right? Are we saying you have to redo your graph or you have to redo all your layouts? Because we don't know that is going to be impactful in getting more performance. We need to look at the server. We need to get all the logs, and we need to catalog first. We need to get some insights into what is expensive in this solution. What is the thing that always causes some delay? So we start with importing the XML DDR. Then we go to the reports and look at the top call stats log. This is one of the more recent ones here. If you're not familiar with the top call stats log, top call stats log is kind of an odd duck. I love it and I hate it at the same time. If you're not familiar with it, the top call stats log will collect the 25 most expensive remote calls that FileMaker Server has received from clients during the logging interval. And as I mentioned, the default logging interval is 30 seconds. So what we're looking at here is 25 records. So those were the 25 most expensive things that happened at 13th of February at 9 p.m. Right? And then the next login interval, I'll get another cross-section of whatever the 25 most expensive things were at that time. Now, the fact that it's logged here doesn't mean that it's painfully expensive. It just happens to be the most expensive thing in those 30 seconds. So it's kind of easy sometimes to go like, oh, I see whatever this thing is. I need to go fix that. I don't need to go fix that because none of the metrics of this particular record here indicate that it's even remotely painful, right? It happens to be the most expensive thing at 9 p.m., but it's really not a concern for me. And the metrics here are the exact same metrics as the ones that we find in the stats log, right? So the one thing that is going to be sort of like the thing that needs to draw your eye when you look at this is the time, and that's the elapsed time per call, right? And these are microseconds, so it takes 1 million of them to have 1 second. So the fact that I have 41,000 in there, that's a half of a tenth of a second, right? I'm not going to worry about that. But if I go look at, I don't know where some of the expensive ones would be. Actually, I can go look for them. I did a search for anything over 500,000. So anything over half a second, that's typically my cutoff where I go like, I need to look at these, right? So anything that takes every single operation, every single call that FileMaker Server receives that takes more than half a second, that's probably something that is worth looking at. So those are the reasons that I like it. Now, here's why I hate it. It's a scattershot approach. Typically, your clients will have issues when things are under load, typically when there are enough users doing the same things at the same time. The fact that FileMaker, that the top call stats log only gives me the 25 most expensive ones doesn't really paint me any kind of picture, right? Because if I have 50 concurrent users, and here's the clincher, every operation, right, the operation that we see here at the top, that is a call. As developers, what do we know about a call? We don't know what a call is. We don't know what an operation is. There's a knowledge gap between what we know of what we do, meaning like we do a go to related, right? Or we switch to a layout. That is an operation as far as we're concerned. FileMaker client will break that down in any number of operations that it's sent to server, but we don't know what that breakdown is. That is not a published set of documentation that we have from Claris. Again, if you can help me push for that, by all means do, because we need to know these things. We need to know how the actions that we know, how these get broken down into operations as they are being logged by the top call stats log. And there's another tool that I'll get to in a sec that is brand new, and there's really nothing in our community about it yet, but we need to build out a body of knowledge around it. So call to action right there. A lot of these operations, we can sort of figure out what they mean. Like there's an operation called query find, right? And this one is kind of expensive. This one actually took more than 2 seconds, right? It was done by this particular user from this IP address. It was on this table, this field, and it was a query. Doesn't mean that this was a user doing a manual find. That's not what this operation tells us, right? Because many things in FileMaker are queries and finds. If I do a go to related, FileMaker has to go find the data. Even if I go to a layout and has a portal on it, FileMaker has to go find the data, right? So all of these things translate into query operations on the FileMaker server backend. Doesn't mean that I'm actually doing a find. Obviously, if I'm doing a scripted find, that is a query, obviously so. So that's where that breakdown is in what we know and what we see in the top call stats log. But at least it gets us somewhere, right? So because now I can see, okay, well, I see that it's expensive, this table, this field. So I look for patterns. Is that same table, same field, is that always one of these things that comes up as being expensive? Because then I can go look in that, that's the beauty of a tool, right? I can then go like, let's have a look at that table and that field, right? Where is it being referenced, right? So that drill down ability to go from the top call stats log to the schema definition to the design of the solution is indispensable, right? These are the kinds of tools that we need that are going to make us really powerful, and it will empower us as developers to go look at what's happening and how can we fix it, right? Because if we don't start with what's painful, we don't know whether we're fixing the right thing. But at least with tools like this, we can. All right, so top call stats log, I absolutely love it. In 19.2, the very latest FileMaker server that we have, if you turn it on, it'll stay on, which is a great thing. And anything that is before 19.2 server, if you turn it on, it'll turn itself back off when you restart FileMaker server. So the stats log will stay on, fortunately. Like as soon as you turn that on, it'll stay on forever. But the client stats and the top call stats log will turn themselves off. So keep that in mind, because you really need to have them on all the time, every time, always, everywhere, every single deployment. I can't stress that enough, right? You need to know these numbers. Without these numbers, as I said, you're flying blind and you don't even know where to start. Even in development, right? If you do your development against a server, turn on those logs, right? Even if you're the only developer, as you're testing and as you're doing these kinds of things, the top call stats log will tell you what's expensive, right? It may not be so expensive that it's going to be painful, but it's still going to give you early insight into those parts of the system that is taxing FileMaker server the most. And sometimes you'll be surprised. Like sometimes it'll make sense, right? If you have a very heavy sub-summary report and you see some of those parts reflected in the top call stats log, you go like, yeah, I can see why. You can still think about making it better, but the real value will come from things that you see in that analysis where you go like, I did not expect that. That's kind of weird. Where does that come from? Right. So even during development and early testing, you'll find that it's extremely useful to use these kinds of tools to make your design better, so that it'll be more scalable, right? It'll be more durable. It'll be able to handle a bigger load than you can. All right. I mentioned there's a new tool that I think is going to prove to be hugely important. It is not right now because nobody uses it, including ourselves. We just don't have the time yet to go figure it out. But this one has the potential to solve the biggest issue I have with the top call stats log. And as I mentioned, that biggest issue is that it's a scattershot approach. If I have 50 concurrent users, I only get 25 of the most expensive things. It's kind of difficult to piece together what was that user doing, because maybe I only get 1 or 2 of his operations in there. I don't know, I cannot puzzle together what the total set of operations was, the scripted ones or the manual ones that user was doing, because I only get those 25 most expensive ones. I've been asking Claris to let us configure that number, right? So maybe make it 100 or 1,000, whatever, right? Because it's my responsibility to kill my server if I want to. So instead of 25, I would want it to make it configurable. They haven't done that yet, but they've given us this. And when I say they've given us this, is that feature that is called the release debug on text file. If you haven't read up on that, this is a great blog post that explains a lot of these features. A lot of the features that were in 19.1, 19.2, you can turn off on the server, or you can turn on and off at the client side. And one of the bigger ones is the one that's listed here on line number 7, remote calls. You can set it on the server. I wouldn't recommend that. But if you're testing with a client, or you have a client, or one particular user at your client is the one that complains the most for whatever is slow, you can create this little text file, drop it in the same folder as the FileMaker Pro application, and just have one line in there called remote calls. What it'll do is it'll create a log on that client with every single call that client generates to FileMaker Server, right? And you'll get it immediately. Now I have a complete set of calls that are being generated by, right? Instead of just the 25 most expensive one on the servers, now I have everything. And what this will allow me to do, and like I said, I think this is going to be hugely important for us as developers. I can now more easily fingerprint the things that we do as FileMaker developers, right? If I want to know what kind of operations does FileMaker Server have to do when I simply go to a particular layout, right? With this, I'll have the full set. I know exactly what a go-to layout means in terms of operations. What if I go to a layout that has 2 portals? What if I go to a layout that has 10 tabs on it, right? So all of these questions that we've always had, like how does FileMaker deal with that? Like, does FileMaker load something from that other tab or from my popover window? I will now be able to definitively answer by testing these single kinds of operations, and then seeing exactly what kind of calls are being generated from that client to FileMaker Server. So with that, I will now overcome one of the biggest drawbacks is that scattershot approach. Unfortunately, and this is where we haven't spent too much time on it yet, the format of the remote calls log that is being generated is slightly different than the one from the top call stats log. So it'll take some time to figure out how to read it, how to build tools around ingesting that data, and then slicing and dicing that data so that it makes sense to us. But it's going to be a great thing. You can make that same file on the server side, and then it'll record all of the calls from all of the users. I wouldn't recommend that because that is going to have an impact on the disk I/O of your FileMaker server, right? because every single operation that we know, like go to a layout, run a script, translates in potentially thousands of remote calls. So got to be careful with that. On a testing and development server, by all means, right? The reason that I would do it on a client is because I want to have full control over initiating an action and then seeing what the result is, so that I can capture that and figure out how it breaks down.
Wim, you got 5 more minutes, mate. So, thank you.
All right. Very good. I'm pretty much at the end of this one, but this is a great blog post that describes how to go about building that debug file and how to use it. There's some other goodies in there. One of them that has a potentially big impact on performance, and that's going to be the last one for today. Ever since FileMaker 15, I believe, FileMaker Client keeps a persistent cache. And the reason they've done that is mainly for FileMaker Go, but also for Pro, is to make WAN experience much faster, so that when you next log in, you don't have to rebuild that local cache from scratch. FileMaker Client and FileMaker Server will figure out, like, I have some stuff in cache already, what's different? And just give me the stuff that's different instead of just building me a new cache from scratch. And we're talking about the client-side cache, right? Not the database server cache that we have on FileMaker Server. That is not always that behavior since FileMaker 15 of having that persistent client cache isn't always faster than it used to be. Used to be there was just one temp file. That temp file would get blown out whenever you close a solution, and it would get rebuilt every time you open a solution. And you can actually see if it's slow, you'll see it in top call stats log, because you'll see download lists and compare modification counts as operations in your top call stats. So if you see that, you know that the act of FileMaker Client and FileMaker Server talking to reconcile what's in the client cache is an expensive operation. And this feature has been flying under the radar since 19.1, but you can now, by controlling that release debug file on the client side, you can revert your FileMaker Pro client back to the old temp file behavior, right? So you can totally disable that persistent client cache on the client side. If you have, for your particular deployment and for your particular solution, if you have determined that is slow in opening solutions, you can blow that out. And that, again, is done by setting something. It's called, here on line number 4, normal temp file.
That will save me a load of time. I actually wrote an Apple script, Wim, that would go in on boot and delete the cache out before they boot FileMaker.
Yep.
Login. Now I can do it in one line on all the machines. Superb. So.
Yep, and that's it. I will leave you with that. I can go on for many more hours, and happy to come back and touch on anything else that maybe has raised some questions. But for now, I think we can leave it at that.
Wonderful. Superb.
It's brilliant. It's, amazing insights. Fantastic. As always, completely blown away by whatever you talk about. And if you're serious about coming back, yes, we'd love to have you back. That would be great.
Anytime.
We got questions. Are you happy to take questions? I don't want to run too late, but you happy to take a couple of questions, Wim?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. And otherwise, just email me the questions. But yeah, I can take a few.
Anyone got questions?
So are you right to start a few minutes later? Okay, great.
Nick, where you go, mate? I'm mute, Nick.
Okay.
Hey, well done.
My end, sorry, my fault. 2 controls. Obviously, thanks very much to Wim for all that wonderful explanation of things. There's a couple of, and I'd agree certainly on things where my skill set intersects with some of his amazing skills. I certainly agree with everything he said. I would like to, though, add a couple of things in on the Linux front, because some of you will be aware that I published a fairly significant piece a few weeks ago on Medium on this, and I spent about 3 months doing some in-depth comparisons between Linux deployment and Windows deployment using Fabrice Nordman's setup. The advantage with that was it wasn't Amazon, it was a separate thing, and they were able to set up different things for me to my spec without me having to learn how to do it, which I found quite an attractive thing. So the key thing that came out of that was that, you see, that we're not only talking about performance here, are we? We're talking about cost, and we're also talking about cost and convenience for the client. So the first point is that if you take a Windows 16 server, running FileMaker Server, and do the sort of tests I do on it, and then do the same thing with the same spec machine with Linux CentOS 7.8, then the Windows machine is about 20% faster. But correspondingly, the Linux machine supports about 20% more clients. So it's pretty much even Stevens. So it is, as I'd agree entirely with Wim, that it is pretty much the same. But that's if you're using the same spec. I beg pardon, sorry. That's if you're on the same cost. That's right, if you're on the same cost. Because the Windows server, the Windows virtual machine, because of Windows licensing, is going to cost you a lot more. And it'll obviously depend on who you use, but certainly on the One More Thing setup, the Windows server for the same spec costs you pretty much twice as much as the Linux server because of obviously paying Microsoft. So if you then spin up another Linux server, which is actually got the same spec, the same cost as the Windows server, which gives you basically twice as much resource, it is, of course, significantly faster. So from a client point of view, when you're not talking purely about performance, when cost is an important factor, then you are going to get more bang for your buck with Linux purely because you haven't got the overhead of the Microsoft licensing. And the second thing that comes out of that testing, and I mean, I put the link into the article there, so anyone who wants to read it can do so, is that the stuff that Wim referred to with AWS, talking about the burst thing, I don't quite understand how that works, but it sounds to me like the flip side of the whole Docker container thing on the Linux platform. So what happens with Docker is that you get to use the resources that are not being used by other people, but there isn't actually a cost to it in the way that there is with AWS. So providing those resources are available, you get to use them. And that means that when you take your Linux deployment and put it in a Docker container instead of being in a virtual machine. So a virtual machine, obviously, is your little box, which is your own personal domain. And if you're doing nothing, no one else can use anything. It's completely locked. When you're in Docker, you're in, to me, it's an elastic container. It's really what an EC is on Amazon. But the way it's implemented is slightly different. And according to Wikipedia, Docker was actually developed by some French guys. So I don't know, I'm not sure about the scale of these things, but it's certainly a very mature technology which has been copied in some other platforms. And the result of that is that when I did the testing I could push the thing to maximum load and get several times more capacity out of the same cost as with Windows if I was on Docker, because basically I could use, in this case, as many of the other 16 cores in the particular hardware boxes weren't being used by anybody else. So I thought that's quite an interesting thing. To me, the Linux deployment that way in a Docker container looks to me like very, very good value for money. But that's based on, I suppose I started testing in middle of November, and I wrote the article, released it, I suppose, about 4 weeks ago, something like that. So it's quite a long period. The only other thing I'd say is that on old hardware, and Wim and I have had it's not a disagreement, but it's a slight different approach on these things. What he says, I'm sure, is absolutely right, and I've done a lot of testing on this stuff as well. But I think that when you've got businesses, not-for-profits, schools, small businesses, all those sorts of things, and you've got a perfectly serviceable bit of hardware that's been sitting in the corner running for 10 years, but where the OS is too out of date now to run a modern copy of FileMaker Server, I think it's a good option to consider installing CentOS, or maybe Ubuntu now as well, but installing Linux on it and running an up-to-date copy version of FileMaker Server on that old hardware. Not obviously, it won't be as performant as a more modern thing with lots of this and lots of that, but it will be cheap. And for a lot of businesses, the cost, certainly in Europe, is a very important factor. It's also more sustainable because you're not throwing away old stuff. You're actually reusing old stuff, which in terms of sustainability, I think maybe scores in some areas. So those are really the two things I want to say. But on FileMaker generally and on Claris generally, because they've moved on to this agile mode, and I don't know, I may have missed a lot of very important conversations about it, but the impression I get talking to people at Claris is the door is absolutely open for anyone who's got a particular thing they want looked at to reach out to the relevant people at Claris and say, look, this thing is really important. Justify to Claris why it's important from Claris's point of view. And they may well put a guy on it for a month or so to actually fix it, because they're no longer on this, waterfall 3-year plan business. It's all being done month to month. And that in that way, Claris are certainly seeking to be very, very much more responsive. The difficult thing is that a lot of the familiar faces we used to talk to, of course, are no longer there. They're doing, they're running quite lean. But there is a real opportunity, I think, for people who say, why has this thing never been done? I've been asking for 4 years. I think you can actually, if it's, if it makes sense from Claris's point of view, I think they will respond more quickly than they would do before. So that's it. And thanks again to Wim. I loved seeing Punisher. It's very, very interesting indeed. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Nick. Anyone else got any questions? If so, raise your hand. Or just talk if you have. Robert?
Yeah. Can I go in?
Yeah.
More in terms of a crystal ball kind of thing than anything else. I'm thinking of a parallel in between two things that or something that really has nothing to do with performance, but it used to be that when things would be designed, people would have to pay attention to disk space, and we know that disk space is not as much an issue as it used to be today. Like Vince Milano has been voicing the same concerns, especially for usage over WAN, and thinking, okay, well, performance is something that needs to be on everyone's radar, and if we have a larger community with more people who are not as educated in terms of those things, it could yield a bad experience for them. So I'm just wondering if we feel like at some point the devices will catch up, and to some degree, I mean, they all have been. I mean, we're doing things on devices that we would not be able to do just a few years back. So is there like something that we think will not necessarily make bloat okay, because I think we should fight the bloat wherever it is, but that it will not have so much of a negative impact on especially the possible new adopters for the platform?
I'll chip in with that one, because as you all know, the complexities of what we build, we have bloat. So we have to deal with that on a day-by-day basis. So we have that problem. I don't think the technology will catch up. I think you're right. I think there's a point it will become less apparent, but I think there should always be that point of developing to a trim, efficient way of building, because what you may think today is okay, tomorrow may not. And I think from our point of view, that's something that we learn on a day-to-day basis. Penny's on the call, by the way. But Penny and I have to deal with this on a regular basis, where we build something, it's a small module today, and literally in a year's time, I've got 60 users hitting it hard, and it was never designed to cater for that. So you're right, you can spin up more servers. I think with cloud technologies where they are, you've got so much scope available to you that you could do that. Whether that's coming back to what Nick was saying, whether that's a cost-effective way of running the business is a different thing to argue. I think that's something you need to look at. I think from our view, for what we're doing, is we're going through an exercise at the moment to trim as much as that bloat as we can, purely because of the where society is at the moment with COVID and everything else. Every business is finding it tough to spend money. So if you can then do something, because you've got a development team already available to you, that you can then trim that, not spend any more money on hardware, any more money on software as far as that's concerned, and keep running for another year or two, that is certainly, from our point of view, what we're looking at. We're looking at it in that way. And that comes back to the Linux. I'm looking at Linux at the moment to move away from our, we've got a data center license for Windows. So it doesn't really matter. I can spin up as many versions of Microsoft as I want in Windows because my license covers it. But I could then look at changing that environment a little bit and then spin up Linux servers and then offsetting some of that cost in the future. So I'm looking at that scenario that at the moment I've got 4 servers. Well, could I run 5 Linux servers or 6 Linux servers if I've got enough processing power to cover that in the data center? So I think they're all viable options. I think hardware now is getting to a point where it's not so important. The one thing I will come back up with what Wim was saying is that misconception of disk space and disk technology and RAID. I think that's the biggest thing, because a lot of people that are going to have that older kit will have, certainly on Mac Minis, is going to have a 5400 spindle disk sitting in there. And good luck trying to run anything that's got lots of sorts, requests, searches, and so forth on it. That's the issue with using legacy software. I agree. If your end client doesn't need that performance within seconds, you could probably get away with it. So, that's my standpoint on where all 3 of you have done your comments today, which I think is great. So, I have one question for Wim, and it was more the point of understanding from a technology standpoint of where you would see a deployment of a solution like what we have. We have 4 servers. So I have lots of files and lots of data go between all those files. So what I've done is I've done match kit in our VM environment. So all the servers are the same. They're across all RAID 10 and they're all configured that way. Would you say it would be better? And I've tackled with this and I haven't got the money to test it. So this is the reason why I'm asking the question. Would it be best to get 1 server with 96 cores in, or 4 servers with 24 cores and then use it across? Because you'll have I/O across all servers. So that was my only question I wanted to ask.
It's an intriguing question, and it probably would need to be tested. The beauty of AWS, for instance, is that you can spin up a 96-core machine for a few hours and only pay the cost for that thing. Personally, and obviously there's more factors than just performance, right? There's redundancy and disaster recoverability and all of that stuff. So if you find that your 96-core machine is at least as fast as the other thing, does it make sense to just have 1 instead of having 2 or 3 or 4? There's some benefits. We do that sometimes with bigger solutions that require, say, more than 100 concurrent users, because we have a few with 200 and 250 concurrent users, where it actually makes sense to split the solution across 3 servers, so that you can use the different sub-IO systems for each one of them separately, and each server has its own set of files. The other thing to consider is advances in technology, especially in the virtual space, right? Because it's easy. In our Soliant.cloud, for instance, we don't do traditional backups anymore. We do block level backups through snapshots, because we know how to do it, and we make them safe, and we can back up gigabytes worth of data in sub-second kind of things. The same with moving data around, right? So we can think about the traditional ways of extracting data at the database level, but we can also do the same thing at the disk level, right? So if we can snapshot the disk, move the disk in virtual space to somewhere else, mount it to another server, extract the data that way, you can offload a bunch of stuff now that we have infrastructure as a service, right? So we can spin these things up. If I need a server that's incredibly high performance to do a data migration, and I know that if I do it on a Amazon Z whatever with incredibly fast scores, but I only need it for 15 minutes, I can spin that up, attach the disks to it, let it do the data migration, spin it back down. It's a very cheap effective way of utilizing a lot of that power that's available to us without having to commit to it long term, because that's always the painful thing. If you have to build your infrastructure for peak load versus maintaining its scalability, obviously and again, that's one of the things that we need to have our ongoing conversation with Claris about, is FileMaker, the FileMaker platform, especially the server side, is not horizontally scalable at this point in time, right? And it really has to be. I think that's the next big glass ceiling that we have to break through. We need to be able to load balance FileMaker Server, right? Have those multiple servers running at the same time, and we don't have it yet, so it's got to be coming.
Yeah. Superb. Should we move on? We've had our time, I think. So thank you so much, Wim. It's a great talk. So great presentation. Superb. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Wim. Very useful.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so what you see here now is the first iteration of the first very early alpha version of the file I want to provide. And here you see all the groups. I mentioned all the groups who are recently on, all the groups who are recently on Meetup, having regular, irregular events. If we just go for our meet, you see there hasn't much action on there yet, but these are the ones I already fetched. And this is a service which is running regularly on the server and fetches every new event, every whatever. So I go on Meetup and just show you the, yeah. Okay, see, there is an event coming up. And the good thing about this is with the API of Meetup, you can grab the data, but you also can grab the ICS file, which is what I provide on my service. And you see the event here is created. If I go back to FileMaker and just call that, I get the events in. See, that is the test event. And I can upload that to the server. And this is one thing really I have to mention Steve Winter and his very good help regarding anything curl. I really, you see these gray hairs were coming from trying to push data up to the server via curl. And one thing I really learned is that things people tell you are not the things they are not the things they are. Means the error messages I got have nothing to do with the real errors happened. That was one thing what I learned the very hard way, and he really fixed it by just adding the file size. Anyway, he was capable, and during that I built this dialog to see what has happened. And this is I recommend to not only get the HTTP request, but also to trace what's happening here, and you can store that in a field, whatever. As you can see here, the file is created, and so it's on the server. And if I go here to the calendar, the published calendar of this week, this week, and I do a little refresh, it should appear sooner or later here. You see, and that is the process in general. What I'm doing back in back channel, that I fetch the data from Meetup, store them in my database, and publish them to a general repository you can subscribe to. That is one thing. The other thing, what I learned about the FileMaker's attempt, or Claris attempt to provide events, is that once for me, it was very hard to put that in, and I couldn't put repeating events in, but every single event alone, or every single event at one time, once. And this is what this is why I disliked them and disliked to use that tool, and that's why I thought why not having a tool built in FileMaker where you can add your events and then add it like a similar like in iCal, or what is it called, a calendar now, to generate ICS files and to provide that SES files to this service, which is called the .fmp events. Today, I again learned a lot of things regarding creating ICS files, and you have to have a lot of things to consider, what you can take in, etc., etc. It was a very nice experience, and this will all be provided in the file once it is released, and the file also has the possibility to check if the things you put in worked well. So that means you can just, that is the textual content of this event. And if we want to validate that, there is luckily still a little bit dusted, but still very good, very working validator for the iCalendar standard, which is still kind of the standard used by plenty of apps. And yeah, great. This time we have a success. And sometimes it throws an error when the text is longer than 74 characters in the line. But that's I also fixed. But I have to find a way to make those data or export those data from FileMaker without adding an additional line feed. This iCalendar standard has you have to parse lines which are longer than 74 characters with a carriage return, line feed, and a space. And if you export that, FileMaker does add an additional return, which, well, yeah, typical FileMaker way. Anyway, but that is something which works or will work, and since the data is valid now, I can also export that and throw that. Yeah, let's do it again, but you don't think it's okay. And export the data as an ICS file, and I either can click that, add that here, and as you see, it's a completely valid text file. That is the technique behind. It will hopefully a little bit more automated once it's all is done. But yeah, up until then, I recommend you, or I offer you to use that for your own pleasure, and to, of course, submit your events if you have some. For now, either as an export from your own calendar file, but for later, you can use the file or just upload it here on the website. This is the calendar which is publicly available. So just in case you don't want to subscribe, or you don't want to whatever, get the file, you can always go there on this page and see what's happening. Or you, of course, can subscribe here. Yeah.
Egbert, can you put those links in the chat for us?
Yes, yeah, I will provide them later.
That'd be great.
That is always the starting page where I put everything more or less important on. This actually is the URL. When you scan the QR code, you sometimes see from me, you end up here. And if you click here, you get the yeah, okay. Of course, I'm already subscribed, but you get that subscription. And once I have figured out how to make this subscription link permanent in Nextcloud, this will the subscription will stick. Sometimes when you share a calendar, or when you unshare a calendar and share that again in Nextcloud, the subscription link changes, but I have to find a way to make that permanent. So if you ever want to subscribe here to this service and it doesn't work for a while anymore, just check the link or download the new link, and it should work again. Okay, that is that thing. Yes, yeah. What I mentioned is that the events take place around the world. So there are some in Australia, some in Abu Dhabi, and here is the thing. I mentioned also a lot of people prefer to meet on Wednesdays. So why on Wednesdays? And this is also good for planning your whatever vacation, or if you don't have anything to do, you can watch FileMaker events, meet FileMaker people from around the world.
Actually, they're not meeting on Wednesday. They're meeting Tuesday night, and it's Wednesday night.
Yes, the good thing about this here is that time zones work. See, they meet a Tuesday at whatever 5 p.m. But if I want to go there, it's 7 p.m. in the evening here. Oh no, sorry, that's my event. Let's go here. See, next week. No, was it this week? No, next week. See, you mean that one, right? ID?
Yeah, they're Tuesday night.
Yeah, so see, and oh wait, that is what I mentioned before, that I learned a lot about time zones and putting the right data in a calendar file, that it's not a strict UTC time, but that the time zone aligns to the app you're using and the time zone you're in currently. That is the good thing about this, that I see in my calendar when these events take place in my time, not in their time. Okay, so that is the very early alpha version, and of course I have some more ideas, some things to go, so some things to do. Next thing will be the website as it is here, as you can see that, but you will be able to filter the events by country and by all the other tags or things, all the things I'm missing from the Claris website, and not only related to a country, but worldwide, or what you prefer. The external app is what I mentioned, the FileMaker app. I think it's quite important that we're using a technology for those things. You're using your own technology and not whatever Excel sheets or Access or any Salesforce. So that's why I decided to build this app, and I will release this app sometimes this spring, whenever it's ready for your own use, so that you can also not only submit, but store your own events there. And yeah, what else? It's as I mentioned, I want to, at least that's my attempt. You know, Germans like to rule the world. I want to submit, or I want to provide as many events, as many FileMaker related things as possible. That means if you know from someone, or if you know there is another source I can talk to, please send me an email or let me know, and I will gladly try to include that into it. Yes, then the import export, yeah, that is, that's all the things for me to do. Yeah, that's it so far. The links to that I will post later in the chat, but as I said, just if you go to spot.fmp.berlin and click here, you can subscribe. If that doesn't work in a while, just check the link and try to subscribe again. Regarding privacy, etc., I do not track how many people have subscribed from where. So that is most of the time quite important for some marketing people, and that's why maybe you have to submit your data on. Anyway, that means it's completely safe. You will not be tracked when you subscribe to that service. Yes, that's it. That is it so far. Any questions? I don't see the chat.
I was just going to say, great work. I tried to play around with syncing at the Google Calendar about 10 years ago and gave up with the time zones. Just gave up. It was just not worth it. So 10 out of 10 for getting that sorted and working well. So that was a real pain when I played around with it. So no, really cool. Really, really
great.
good.
Great.
I think it's going to be a great resource, really helpful to lots of people to have everything in one place. It's really valuable.
Yeah, that was my main idea to when I learned how interesting or how nice it is to meet the people online. There should be more resources, and I want to see this current mess, or I want to get some positive things out of this current mess. And one of the things is that I more and more do these video conferencing, also just meeting colleagues. And that's one of my outcomes of that. And to extend that even further, that's why I started to build this calendar.
Very good.
Excellent. Thank you. Are you going to hang around, Egbert, for
Yes,
later
sure.
for the virtual bar? So if anyone's got any more questions, we could take those in there.
Yeah. Great. So do I have to unshare? No, you can kick me.
All done.
All done.
You're not sharing. You've stopped already. So you press the stop button. You're done. All good. Nice one. Superb. John, we're running a little late, but still awake.
I sent you an email, but I don't think you woke up to it.
All yours, mate.
Okay. Let me just go to entire screen down there. Sorry, give me a sec. Sharing screen, you can all see that. Yes, you'll have to shout.
Good. Yeah, perfect.
So what I am going to do is like a kind of, it's a presentation help document, so you can come back to it and go off to other things. I'm not going to sit and demo stuff in that sense. There is a chance to demo, which we can do in the virtual bar, because I have been playing with OData. If you've listened to any of Rick's presentations in the last 2 years, he will be mentioning at some point, oh yes, and now you've got OData. So the question really quickly for anybody who's not gone down the what's it about is, this is what it's about. Now, we all understand what REST is now doing because we're all working with the APIs. It's a general way of getting data from some kind of web service. And OData is a technology within that opens up structured data, but using REST as the method of getting the data. Some kind of similarities with JDBC, ODBC, SQL, but using a web tech. Big thing, not related, not limited just to relational databases. It started as a Microsoft tech. I think some clever blokes sat in a conference and went, oh, here's an idea, why don't we think about this? But back in 2007. And therefore it's heavily supported and initially came out of the Microsoft stable. So Microsoft Dynamics, for instance, is totally OData driven. That may or may not be a good thing, but they did go on hand it off to Oasis, massive, great, long thing that I'm not going to bother to read. But it's been on version 4 for quite a long time. It's quite a stable tech. FileMaker is using version 4.0. Version 4.01 has only just come out. It's got a few new things, but don't expect to see it in FileMaker anytime soon. I found this really interesting quote in ZDNet back in 2012. The secret to data in the future will not be with the repositories which contain the data, but the way we transport that data back and forth from applications, online services in the cloud, which may or may not be true, given the massive increase in what Amazon is doing and Google and those kind of things. But they were touting why OData was making a difference, was it was about removing silos and making smooth connections between where data is stored. So the kinds of things that we'd expect to see are using HTTP verbs for our create, read, update, delete. It's just like, so you just got to put your data API head on or your API head on for a moment. A couple of places to go and learn: odata.org. There's a quick getting started, which you've had, add that to the top. There's also, you can download a Postman collection, which is actually how I started playing with it, was adapting their Postman collection to FileMaker. And all the documentation about OData is on docs.oasis-open.org. So you can have the PowerPoint afterwards, so you can go, and this is like a, off you can go, get yourself up and running. It's implemented in FileMaker in FM Cloud and on Linux server. So think FileMaker 19. As you're aware, if you've installed any of those, custom web publishing with PHP and XML goes away. In fact, now if you update your Windows server and have forgotten to back up your PHP folder, that will disappear as well, and you'll have to go and recover it from a backup. It's a similar functionality to the data API in that it's metered data out. There's a Claris help document. There's also a really helpful, at the Dig FM just recently, Steve from Beeswax did a great presentation. I've been speaking to him in the last few days. The demo file from that will shortly be available on the Beeswax blog. So actually it's a good time for you if you want to go and, he does a lot of example stuff, so showing stuff. So there's a bunch of links. If you're in your admin console, under connectors, there's a new tab for OData, which you can then turn on and off. The annual limit is shared with the data API, but you can see how much has been taken out by this tech. Also, if you go into the logging tab, I'm unfortunately not highlighting the right thing, but at the bottom, there's a new log file called fmodata.log, which you can download, and looks something like this. It's like any kind of logging file. It's not logging the actual data that's being sent out, but it is logging the request. And there is an issue with that, which I'll come to in a short while. Additionally, within your FileMaker client file, there's now a new extended privilege, FM OData. So you can have a privilege set which just allows talking to OData. It's not a generic REST thing. It's a separate privilege set which you can use. Compared to the data API, DAPI. So data API, as you know, uses a token-based authorization. So you log on, get a token, then you use that token in every subsequent request, which means you've got to deal with storing it, deal with expiry dates, refreshing it. And it's also importantly based on FileMaker layout. So we end up going and creating a layout just so that we can do a data request so that we don't end up downloading everything. But we do get, as I pointed out last time I presented, streaming containers, which currently are not currently metered to get the data out. The big difference with OData, really quite an important one, is that it only ever uses basic authorization. There's no managing of tokens. And it's only based on a table occurrence. You can have a data file which just has table occurrences. It does not even have to have any layouts for those table occurrences. No relationships, the simplest kind of data store. There are some issues which I'll discuss about containers, but over the data API, massive thing, we get to be able to make schema changes and do batch-based transactional creation and update. So, like an API, we start with a base URL, and it's based on a file name. In the parameters, we have special modifiers, things with a dollar in front of them. Not going to go into lots of detail about that. But then the URL parameters for a filter, which is like a search or a query, are case sensitive, but they have a much greater similarity to SQL. So EQ means equal, NE means not equal, LT is less than, GT greater than. But it also contains string and int functions. Again, if you've been used to writing SQL queries, none of that will be strange to you. Additionally, we can talk to the FileMaker_tables special table. So that's how we can create a table. We make a post to that table, and it can include default fields when you're making the post. Anything that changes schema requires full access. So you often set up a separate account which has OData access as well as full access, because you can't change the schema if you're an ordinary person. We all think that's a good idea. And then within the table, you can additionally, using a patch or delete, you can add or delete fields. So you can build a file from OData by creating tables and fields. You can define the field type. Again, that looks a bit like SQL, but it can contain various things like external secure path if it's a container field, or a keyword like username will turn it into get username within the FileMaker scheme. You can also create and delete indices in tables using the FileMaker_indexes table. And totally independently, you can run scripts. That's the kind of, you've got a database name, script dot script name will then run a script using OData. It does, gotcha, it does run the on first window open script and the on last window close script. I'm going to be imagining that because scripts always need a context. So you need to be somewhere on a table to be able to make a script run. So if you've actually removed all your layouts, your scripts aren't going to work anyway. But you can pass, in the body of the request, you can pass something called a script parameter value, which can be a string or a number or a JSON object, but no special characters. So if you're a habit of naming your scripts 300, 301, 302, that's not going to work because you can't have it starting with a number either. If the script contains an exit script step and you pass something back, you get that in the OData result as result parameter. So this looks very similar to if you've done any data API work against FileMaker or any generic API stuff. HTTPS only, your server /FMI/OData/v4, then the file name, and then you build the query parameters. So something like $filter. Again, it's case sensitive, and this then needs to be URL encoded. So where I've got a space in between the field name and the EQ, that has to turn into %20, has to be URL encoded. It is case sensitive. But all of this additionally respects record locking and any field validation rules when we get to look at create. So all of that, fairly simple. Some of the issues with OData are around number fields. They are limited in the same way that our JSON functions are. So if you have a very, very long number, it can be truncated. There is a way, if you add this header, IEE 754 compatible is true, it will treat the number as a string when it's retrieving the data. So it should avoid truncation. You can create a record where you're creating, if you need to create a number field or create a record with a number field that's a very, very long number, you can do it in the Atom, the XML format, as opposed to JSON format. But if you try and wrap the long number in quotes to think you'll get round it, you then get a type mismatch. It says, oh, you're trying to put a string into a number field. That won't work, and you'll get an error. A couple of things to watch out with there. You can upload to a field container data, either by uploading it as a base64 string, or you set the FileMaker variable to a container, so it contains the binary container data in the variable, and then use the $data in your headers. If you are on FileMaker Cloud, it uses the FileMaker Claris ID token to connect, not the basic authentication, which uses Cognito. I'm going to just go, oh, that's not for the faint-hearted. Really, it's even the documentation's hard to follow, but it uses that and not the basic auth, because you don't have a basic username, you have a Claris ID. Couple of things that are not obvious to consider. Let's just jump back to it. In the log, so here, I've done a get on FMI OData v4 on a web content table looking at a service, and here is the unique ID of a record that is in the log file. I'm going to say there's some chance that may be some level of security issue, as in you don't necessarily want that stuff exposed. So just a question to ask. Also, the whole thing about within your file, about how you're storing the credentials that your scripts are then running. And why? Well, because anybody now who has OData experience can get in and hack your data if they've got that. So there was an interesting discussion around if you create a DDR and you've stored it in a script, you keep your file encrypted and locked up on a server, and you leave your DDR on a desktop completely open, and it's an open text file that somebody can go and go, oh, there's a username and a password. Oh, it uses OData. I know how OData works. There's no magic to it. Just, again, it's an issue to consider. One possible way around it is that instead of using a get to get some data, you create a simple batch request which you post, so therefore none of that gets stored in the log file. That's just a sideways thing. Not going to demo, but I will if people ask me to. But one of the things that, as a for example, that I have done recently is one of the projects I'm involved in higher education. We get given a specification in XML. So here is one of those kind of files. And the top part of it contains essentially value list information. This is a course type, and there's a label and a value, and a label and a value, and a label and a value, and then there's another field. So it's effectively the data that would create a value list that I want to be able to put into a table. My previous way of doing all of this was going through the XML, copying and pasting the field names, creating the fields in FileMaker, and then spinning through the XML to extract the data and putting it in. Using OData, what I have managed to do is read the XML in a table which has no fields, read the XML, work out all of the nodes that are in there, so all of those fields, query and see if that field is already in the table using SQL. If it's not, create it, and I create a code underscore node and code to hold the code and the label. So loop through the whole thing, creating all the fields that you need, and then go back to the beginning and loop over all the nodes, extracting the values and creating the records that are required by working out. So the quick way of doing it is working out how many records you're going to need, seeing if you already have enough records, loop through enough records that you need, and then if you need more, do a create as opposed to an update the record. So I've created a script which now, when a brand new XML file is issued, I can copy the script to a brand new file that just has the table with no fields in it, run the script, and it will suck all of the data out of the XML file, and using OData, just build my table for me, build all the fields I need, and populate all the values. So there we go. I've done a good job about being really, really quick about my presentation, but I haven't shown you anything. So if people want to see anything, I've got Postman open here, and we can just look at a few quick requests. But essentially, either we can stop here and go and get beer, and I can do a bit of demo later, or that's totally up to everybody else.
That's great, John. You answered my main question, which was why, at the end of your presentation. Why would you want to do it? That was the first thing that occurred to me. I suspect a 10-minute break just to get beers and things for people who want to would be good. And then, yeah, I'd love to see a demo. I don't know anyone else. I think you should be able to see that now, hopefully. So the FMBug website has got, John talked about, I hope John's going to send me the files, and they'll be available on the FMBug website under the meeting. So I will try and keep this up to date to make sure that we've got all the resources if people need them. So it's a go-to point for that. And whilst I'm on it, please, if you've got any ideas, do submit it to our topics, or you want to talk, or you want to see someone else's idea talked about, put them in there and go and use that resource. It'd be good. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. That's fmbug.org.uk. I'll put that in the chat as well. Anyone else got any comments before we have a quick beer and then reconvene? I mean, we'll leave it open, so do talk in the interim. Don't feel you've got to go away and get a beer, although it is compulsory to drink.